following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank Saberic, and we have a pretty, I think it's a pretty exciting subject when you can compare the crux of where pornography is as far as like a world problem, a world epidemic, if you will. And just to give you a perspective, I'll introduce my guest in a second. I'm going to compare like what porn, the success of porn to one of the largest porn websites in 2015 versus the Google hits that God has and the Google hits that Jesus Christ has. I just went just before the show, I went on Google, I Googled Jesus Christ. He had 150 million hits on Google, I guess the entire time since Google's been in inception or whatever. The name God, which, you know, there's a lot of religions that recognize God but don't recognize Jesus Christ, so it's understandable that he's got 1,540,000,000 hits, or about 1.5 billion. Compare that to the this website. I'm not going to mention the name of the website because I don't want to add to the problem, but we'll call this website blank blank. And I'll just give you an excerpt of what the Washington Post, they did a story about this on April 22nd. The porn trafficking website blank blank said it had one of the biggest years ever in 2015. There were 87,849,731,608 pornographic videos. So that's almost 88 billion on its site, it said. That's the equivalent of 12 videos per person in the entire planet. It's like filling all the storage on all the iPhones sold in 2015. And what's more, the United States is blank blank's #1 client, accounting for about 41% of the world's sex traffic. Utah ranked 34th in the country, blah, 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 for its visits. But my guest here is the executive director of the Nathan Project, which is out of Bedford, New Hampshire. Executive Rick Kardos. Rick, how you doing today?
Very good. How are you?
Great. Great. So is this an exaggeration, or is porn just out of control? Why don't you give us a little more perspective on like what you do and why you got involved in the industry, the ministry you did?
I see all the same, websites and statistics that you looked up, and I would say not only are they accurate, they should scare the living daylights out of everybody that's watching. Porn is a public health crisis. You and I spoke about that briefly before today. And the size is beyond comprehension. I don't know about you. I heard all the numbers you spoke about. They don't make sense to me. There's no rhyme to reason. I just know it's so big. I can't fathom that it's bigger than God and Jesus when it comes to being Googled. But that tells you the power of pornography online.
Yeah. One thing too, speaking about God and Jesus Christ, I don't think they were really, if you faithfully believe in the Bible, which now I know you're a ordained minister in the a non-denominational
Right.
faith type thing,
Sure.
and I know it says like it's either Ephesians or Colossians, maybe even Philippians. Paul the Apostle writes through and inspiration of the Holy Spirit that put on the whole armor of God, stand against the wiles of the devil. But also in that same book, I think Paul the Apostle writes, flee fornication. So God knows the deviant nature of that particular sin of fornication and
Sure.
pornography, saying, don't try to fight it, don't pander with it, just make a 180-degree turn and flee. Get the heck out of there, type of
Sure.
thing. So I think it's definitely something to be reckoned with, and something. So how did you get involved yourself, Rick Kardos? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in this Nathan Project ministry.
Well, I think first things first,
Okay.
you might say I'm a survivor of the addiction to pornography. I was probably 12, maybe 13 years old, right there in those middle school years, when I first found a pornographic novel in a grocery store. It looked just like the other novels that were there, had the same kind of cover, looked the same with the initials of a ministry, no, with initials of like the man from Uncle. And so it looked just like that. I picked the book up, I took it home, I began to read it. Soon thereafter, I learned what solo sex was, and I began to put the two together. From there, it was finding my father's stash, finding his pornography, and which is very common
Yeah.
for men.
Yeah.
They find their dad's stuff. And from there, I was off to the races. I would say by the time I was a freshman, in high school, I was addicted. There was more important that I look at porn and want to be with women and engage in solo sex than anything else that was going on. Went from an A student to a C student by the time I graduated from high school. I took the addiction right into my university life. College was a bigger arena to try and be with women, to be sexual with women, to look at more porn, and took that right into a marriage. When I was 27 years old, I married, and I bought into what I would call Satan's great lie, and I think it's the culture's great lie as well, and that is, if we marry, this problem will go away. We'll get better. The problem is it gets worse. You presume that this woman you're married is going to meet all your demands, and I've stood in front of rooms of 1,000 men and asked the question, married men, how many of you married a woman and she met all of your sexual desires just the way you expected that they met? And very few hands go up.
Yeah.
So you come with this large expectation, she can't meet them, and you're angry, the demand grows. Now you have an excuse to do something because you're not being with your wife and it's her fault. And I followed that path, to the T. Became a philandering fool. I was out. Not only was I engaged with porn, soon thereafter, porn wasn't enough. I wanted other women and other, stuff. And that led me to, life that was pretty much out of control. It was more important to do that. Job, work, things like that suffered. I had a son. My relationship with him suffered. But I had some good news, too. In 1989, I met a man on an airplane who talked to me about his church and what was going on. And at some point I said to him, so why all the talk about church? I knew him casually. And he said, well, I'm a born-again Christian. I was born again at a Billy Graham conference in Manchester, like 15, 20 years ago. And that same gentleman, we began to talk more, and we talked about sin and the issue and the problem. I shared with him what I was doing, that when I was traveling, I was, not being faithful to my wife. And he gave me a little track that had some information about Jesus Christ. And on the way home, I had that out and had the dome light on my car and read and understood that what I was doing was not only wrong, and wrong by the world standards, and not being with my wife, but according to Christ standards, it was seriously wrong. And I made a deal. Being a salesman, I thought I could make a deal with God and say, well, I'll do it your way if you help me take care of my problem. Little did I know that, 1989 and 2016, was that 30, can't do the math, 31,
Yeah.
33 years later, or 30 however many years later, I'd be sitting here, a minister, and the majority of that problem that I had is in the past. So he certainly held up his side of the deal, and I'm working hard to hold up my side. Anyway, ended in divorce, my marriage, in 1995, 96. I remarried in June of 1996 to a wonderful woman, Vicki. She's actually the co-founder of the Nathan Project. We founded it together. 96 to 2004, I think. I was an executive recruiter, had my own business. I was bivocational in the ministry at that time. I was learning, studying the Bible. And then in 2004, an organization called the National Coalition for the Protection of Children and Families, which formerly was the National Coalition Against Pornography. You don't mind this long story, I
Oh,
hope.
that's fine. That's fine. That's what these shows are all about.
My soliloquy today.
Yeah.
So they offered me a position as their executive director to take the Nathan Project to all of New England. And I received a salary. I was able to close my firm as an executive recruiter and go into the ministry full time. That 2005, and I did that, and it's a big praise the Lord to the National Coalition. They're Pure Hope today, by the way. They have changed their name, purehope.com. But they allowed me to work and build a ministry and build the FMO groups. We'll talk about that in a few minutes across all of New England. And then 2011, they closed their regional offices, and I took the Nathan Project into a full-time 501c3 where we raise our own funds. And so the ministry is the same. It's more focused on the issue of pornography and sexual addiction. And
Just to
that's pretty
interject,
much.
why I know we talked about this before. The name Nathan Project, it was not named after a guy named Nathan who got caught up in pornography and committed suicide. It's
No.
a whole different Nathan.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, so if you'd like to share that, I think
Well,
that
in the
gives-
Bible, 3 different times, King David and the nation of Israel was approached by the prophet Nathan. And most of you are familiar, or most of your audience probably familiar with Nathan and David and Bathsheba.
Oh, yeah.
And what Nathan did was he came forward, and he wasn't asked by David, what do you think of my situation with Bathsheba? Instead, he stepped in, called him out on the things he had been doing, the wrong that he had committed, the murder that he committed against Bathsheba's husband. And he said that you're a wrong man. And David turned and basically said, you're right, I am. Turned away from the sin that he had done. He did lose his first son. The point of it all, though, is that the next time David wants to build a temple, Nathan steps in and says, no, your son will be a king of peace, you're a king of war, and he's going to build a temple. And then on his deathbed, Nathan also intervened and shared with David that his son was going to try to take the kingdom by killing him. And but each time Nathan stepped into David's life unannounced and brought advice or called him out on his sin. And our idea, or my idea, was that the Nathan Project would be a ministry about the same thing, that I need a Nathan in my life. I would like a man who would step up and say, hey, Rick, I saw what you're doing, and it's not okay. He'd call me out on my sins. And in so doing, I would repent, I would turn away from it, just as David did. You remember David eventually was called a man after God's own heart,
Yeah.
and the greatest king of Israel. But anyway, so that Nathan who stepped into my life would bring my sins to the forefront, I would turn away, I would repent, I would get healthy, and now I could become a Nathan in another man's life. Thus, a Nathan project was that men who struggled would experience that Nathan who comes to them. Within our FMO groups, that's what happens. And then they would turn around and do the same for another.
I see. Now, before we get too into this, well, I know I told you before that your website, nathanproject.net, will be probably under your face, probably through the whole interview. If you told me before that there's every day of the week there's some weekly meeting going on somewhere like in New Hampshire or Massachusetts, that people with this problem or feel they might have this problem can like take advantage of one of these meetings and come in and participate. Is that correct though, that there's like 3 or 4 different meetings that go on all the time?
The meetings are closed, confidential meetings.
Okay.
They're closed in that you can't visit a meeting. You can't just show up. First, let me share with you, if I can, what
sure.
is a foreman only meeting? FMO.
Okay,
Stands for foreman only.
All right.
Is their meetings, they actually began with a ministry called Pure Desire 30-some years ago out on the West Coast. A pastor began these meetings called foreman only groups. 4 guys who were struggling with pornography and sexual addiction. They were willing to admit that they had a problem. They came forward. But instead of just entering into a group with a group of other men, they went through a vetting process to understand the depth of the problem, what was going on, what the group looked like, how they were going to participate. And then when they made a commitment, they were accepted into a group.
Okay.
Usually 6 to 12 men. Study a curriculum. We use something called the 40-60-20 plan. The first 40 minutes, the men share what happened during their week. To some degree, they share according to something called a faster scale. And then 60 minutes of curriculum, and then 20 minutes at the end of a commitment to change. And in the commitment to change, the men agree, to call each other and hold each other's feet to the fire, so to speak, for that commitment that they're making. But the groups, when you say there's one meeting every week, across New England, the 6 New England states, there are probably between 40 and 50 groups. You can find them on the website. It'll say find a group, and you can go under there and see them in Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont. And there's even some now in New York State that have come out of this ministry. And you can call the leader of one of those groups, and he will call back and then, have some meetings with you, probably 2 or 3 meetings, and then you'll be invited to be a part of a group. But that's when I say if you want to say there's one every night of the week, yeah, but one might be here in New Hampshire, and the one on Thursday might be in Connecticut. So they're not options to go to. Here in the Bedford, Merrimack, Manchester area, Nashua, Londonderry, I think there's 5 or 6 different groups, and they do meet several nights a week.
Okay.
But you would only attend one. It's not an option. You become part of a group. They're closed, they're confidential. There's professionals in there. There's lawyers, doctors, plumbers, carpenters, people with and without jobs, and they all want their confidence held.
I understand. Okay, you mentioned about one thing I want to bounce off of you. You mentioned like in your brochure here about isolation, and also I would have assumed that would help tremendously. And I don't mean to compare apples and oranges here, but I heard like one person, in fact, a preacher who got caught in an adulterous affair. After that, his wife forgave him for his sins and stuff like that, and he just chose at that point that when he goes on the internet, that he would leave the door open, and as far as his passwords go, he would have his passwords written down, like right there, that if his kids or his wife want to see what he was into or his sites and stuff like that, they'd be more than happy to go into his accounts. Does that type of openness help a person with a porn addiction if they're like married and stuff like that, or is it depending on the spouse? On
Well, I mean, anytime you break free of isolation, if what you're doing is in secret, it's a lot easier to do. In other words, if I'm able to keep my porn use a secret and nobody knows, there's very little consequence that the world sees or that people see. But if it does become public, one of the good things that happens is coming out of the isolation gives you a chance to, I mean, in the Christian world, which you and I both are, and which the ministry is a Christian ministry, we would say it allows us to confess our sins, to repent and turn away, because it's become public. We've come before the Lord, we've come before our wives, or we've been caught. Most times we don't come before our wives, we get caught. That's most men that come to an FMO group, quite frankly, the motivation is to save their marriage. In other words, the number of marriages that end up in divorce when sexual addiction is disclosed in a marriage is significant. It's quite high. Whether or not they, so the isolation, that comment is more of coming out of the isolation of your addiction being done in secret, using porn, using solo sex to gratify, to medicate pain from the past, versus just isolation of doing it in secret. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In other words, it's good that they have the computer in the middle of the room or passwords available. Those things are helpful. But those are just a small step in becoming free from addiction to pornography. Pornography is the #1 addiction in America, okay? And it's the most powerful addiction in America. You had asked me a question earlier about the comparison between certain drugs and alcohol.
Cigarettes, alcohol, and
Yeah.
cocaine. And food.
And food.
Overeating, yeah.
Yeah. Food is probably the addiction that's closest, and as far as a relationship to pornography. But when you compare it, for example, compare it to cocaine, the response in the brain when cocaine is introduced into the body and the response in the brain to when pornography is seen and you begin to step into its use are very, very similar. They've done not PET scans, but brain scans where they took a look at a man's brain when he looked at porn and when cocaine was introduced into his system. And they watched certain parts of the brain. Have you seen that when they show where they light up yellow and green and blue?
Oh, yeah.
They see the exact same parts of the brain. The same neurotransmitters are used. The same connection comes from the center, the inner brain, to the prefrontal cortex where you make decisions. So they're very similar. But what's a big difference between cocaine and looking at pornography? One, you have to go by. You have to do it in semi-anonymity, okay? You have to do it in secret for sure. It's illegal. It costs a lot of money. Porn, on the other hand, and I know I set my smartphone over there on the table before we sat down.
Yeah, so it
Porn's available in the palm of my hand. So we talk about the statistics. You mentioned them earlier.
Yeah.
I forget. I have some of the same ones. Blank Blank, another major free porn site, boasted in 2015 they streamed 75 gigabytes of data a second, which translates to enough porn to fill the storage in 175 million 16 gig iPhones. Now, they may exaggerate. They're talking about their business, and many people exaggerate the size of their business. But still, take that down to a third. It's huge. The point is cocaine means going to the outside, buying it, using it, whether it's needles or snorting, however you use your cocaine. Pornography on your phone, anywhere you want it, 24/7. And that's a significant difference because our young people are the fastest growing users. By far, I think 62%, according to George Barna, according to a survey, 62% of Americans between the ages of 13 and 24 are using porn on a regular basis. And that number continues to grow, not only because of the addiction, but also because of the availability. Every day, porn becomes easier to see.
Amazing, amazing. We had talked beforehand. When I, had you asked you to come on my show, you had bounced off of me that the state of Utah and the Republican Party, I guess, the Republican Party, I guess, is pushing to have pornography as a national health crisis, and the state of Utah has already passed it in their state legislature. What exactly does that entail, and would you like to see that happen in New Hampshire?
Well, first off, and it was a resolution, not didn't pass as a law in Utah. And what they did was they wanted to add it as a plank to the campaign platform at the convention. That was, what, a month ago? Maybe a little more than a month ago. And that it is a public health crisis. So would I like to see it in New Hampshire? Of course. I'd love to see a bill go before the New Hampshire legislature defining it as that and have it treated as such so that people can get help.
Okay. So would that mean, can people go, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I don't understand what a national health crisis is. Could a person, go on, say, can't work anymore because they're too enthralled with the pornography addiction or something like that, saying I can't work because this has overtaken my head and I need help and that sort of thing? Or am I totally off base here on what a national health crisis?
I grabbed an article before I came today and about pornography. It's an introduction to a large paper. And they said pornography of the day created an unprecedented epidemic of sexual harm. Children and young people are being exposed to violent and degrading content, which by default has served as their sex education. Once a social or health issue involves problems that affect individuals or groups beyond their capacity to correct, responsibility shifts from individual accountability to holding the forces and influence that cause it accountable. While educating individual parents to guide and protect their children is always part of a prevention plan, the problem is well beyond what individual parents and children can do to protect themselves. Make no mistake, there are laws against pornography, against its dissemination. They're not enforced. Okay, many of them are misdemeanor crimes, so they're let go by the local law enforcement. It'd be nice to see that change. I think if it were defined as a public health crisis, that's one of the things that would happen. But the idea of it being a crisis is, I'll give you an example. I think a good example.
Right.
If use a low number, say 70% of all the pornography that our young adults, say between the ages of 13 and 17, are looking at, say 70% of it is degrading, humiliating, and violence against women. Okay? So you have a young man in this first contact with intimacy or with sexual intimacy is violence, degradation, and humiliation of a woman. So his sex education, what he's learning about sex, is that those three things are intimacy. So now he's going to meet Sally, and Sally has looked at some of the porn as well, and she's begun to believe that that's what intimacy is, so that she must acquiesce, that he comes to her and what he wants is what he's seen. And she decides that what he wants is what she must do. And one of the most horrible parts of it is if you were watching a porn video, and I, by the way, haven't seen a porn video or whatever since 1999. I've experienced sobriety, freedom from pornography and masturbation since then, and praise the Lord for that to happen. But if the two of them come together, and that's the situation, it's a recipe for disaster. And then I'm going to add a small, the cover of Time magazine in April had a porn on the cover. It had an entire article devoted to the idea, or to the assertion that there was such a thing as PIED, porn-induced erectile dysfunction, meaning that the young men today are the fastest growing new users of erectile dysfunction drugs like Viagra, for example.
Yeah.
The reason being is that this whole generation grew up using porn. That's their introduction. They started at 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 years old. They've used porn to achieve an erection. They've masturbated, and that's what they've called sex. Now they're being engaged with sex with a woman, and they're unable to perform. And they turn to a drug to get help. And when I say 13 to 17, that's also the age that we're seeing more and more sexual activity between our children. And many of them are children. They're young adults. But does that help a little bit to understand?
Yeah. But one thing I'm a little confused on, it seems like getting healthy or getting cured, well, you're never really cured. I mean, you're like 1 centimeter away from getting involved in the problem if you're not careful enough.
You have to be more careful if you've experienced an addiction. Again, if you think about neurotransmitters and the neural pathways in your brain,
Okay.
from the eye gate to the center of the brain to the inner brain, fastest neurotransmission going. What you see in there, and it's the way God created us, not an accident. Okay, we're created for that sexual urge, for that sexual desire to come through the eye gate and into the inner brain, and then it sends a message to the prefrontal cortex. What do I do with this? So, and by the way, my knowledge of neurochemistry and what I'm going to share with you is this big.
Okay.
So if anybody's out there watching and wants to correct me, again, my name is right underneath that.
Yeah,
I
and the
face it all
website
time.
is right
and
there.
And the website, I have no problem hearing from you. But so that neurotransmission that heads to the prefrontal cortex says that was good, or that was nice looking, or went to the place of looking at the image a step further, and a decision has to be made. What do I do with it? So that whole process, suppose it's a dirt road, or it's a path in the woods. It comes in, it goes down, it gets processed. Maybe I'm 23, 24, 25 years old, which is when the front of my brain as a man begins to mature or is totally mature. Not 13, 14, 15, when the ability to process that doesn't exist. I'm just not able to process those sexual images in my brain. I've heard somebody refer to it as brain rape, So we have this pathway, and it's a dirt road, but then you use it over and over and over again. Boom, into the inner brain, up to the prefrontal cortex. What do I do with it? And that pathway becomes the Autobahn in Germany. You're going 90 miles an hour everywhere you want. Now here's the good news. You have that neural pathway, you've struggled with the addiction, you begin to get healthy. First, you're sober. If you're going to remove the pornography, the drug from your life, okay. Then you begin to get healthy. You've walked through, as a Christian man, maybe you've walked through the effort of confession, repentance, that turning away, and now rebuilding your life as a Christ follower. That was my experience anyway. And you've basically found that 90-mile-an-hour highway, identified it, and now you're going to rewrite a new pathway that's slow, that's normal. But the old one's still there. You can go back to it. Does that make sense to you? In other words, but what you want to do, and the good news is your brain heals. Your brain writes new neural pathways that are normal. So if the brain heals, the idea that you're only a centimeter, or however you put it, away I don't think that's really accurate, to be honest, Frank. I think that you can be healthy and experience a healthy sex life. And if you go back to the comparison between drugs, you can you can abstain from using cocaine or heroin or whatever drug it actually is. But as a married man, I'd like to be sexual with my wife. So I'm going to go back and do the very thing that, in quotes, I was addicted to, which was the sexual addiction. But I'm going to do it as a healthy man with my wife. So that's why early on I made the comment that the addiction that's most similar to sexual addiction or sexual addiction is food.
Okay, that would make sense. Because the food is so regularly available.
And we need food. We need food to survive. If everybody quit having sex completely, we'd eventually go away.
That's true. That's true.
We'd have no procreation.
So basically, not necessarily porn on your iPhone or something like that, or your laptop, but I mean, you're walking every day. Like if you go to a beach, a swimming pool, the shopping malls, supermarkets in the summertime and stuff like that, and you see, scantily dressed young ladies and stuff like that. You just basically turn away and think of a Bible verse or think of Jesus or something like that to get your mind off the scenery?
I've asked men that aren't having the struggle, and they told me that they see the same things I do. But their natural isn't to turn away as quickly as they can. Their natural is to see what they see and then go about their business, not stay and fantasize or think about or process. So what you're trying to do as someone that's been an addicted, one of the things you might do is have a Bible verse memorized. You have something memorized where you see something and you want to take a second look. Instead, you turn away and you immediately give it to the Lord, or you immediately, say that Bible verse yourself. But that's a tool to get better. What you want to do is get healthy so that your natural would be to look and not process it. And we talked about the neural pathway. We want it to be that dirt road again, that single path that's natural and healthy. You see an attractive girl, you identify her as an attractive girl, but you don't follow that with a second look and a third look and a fantasy. You live a healthy lifestyle. And again, you can be healthy again. You're not stuck into this addiction for your entire life. Okay.
And we talked before, too, women are wired differently than men. So a woman, even like a teenage girl, whether it's a teenage girl or 20-something-year-old girl, they can watch afternoon soap operas or read Harlequin romances ad nauseum, day in and day out, and they're not going to be porn addicts like men would. You're doing counterparts to that.
Yeah, I can't speak to it. I don't know the answer to that question. Except in one situation, we're talking about images. And the other, we're talking about, well, you know what? I shouldn't go there because I don't know enough about it to answer the question properly. Except to say that there is a major difference in the way our brains are created, women and men. We do process pornography different, just like we process many other things in a totally different way. My wife's intuitiveness, it's 100 times better than mine, but that's the way she's wired with a knower that knows more than my knower ever will, and knower meaning her intuitiveness. But we're different. We're wired differently, women and men, and but exactly how and how that relates to a Harlequin romance and pornography and the images
and soap operas.
There is a difference, so obviously.
Okay, so on your brochure that you had available at Soulfest earlier this month, well, you probably have these available around different places. I don't know where, but anyway, it has 4 men-only groups, and it has 4 women-only groups. Why the women if it's not that prevalent of a problem with women?
Well,
What?
first off, it's not so much it's not prevalent or as prevalent. It's not as prevalent for sure. But the fastest growing user of pornography are women between the ages of, I think it's 17 and 28 or 17 and 29. That's the fastest growing new user of porn. But a lot of that can be curiosity, can be interest in what he's seeing. Why is that what he wants? Why am I being told that this and that and so on and so forth is the way, sex should be? But they are the fastest growing new user. But the FWO groups, the for women only groups, are for the wives of men who are struggling with sexual addiction. They're not for, there are groups called FWO, we're not running any, which are for women who are sexual addicts. And yes, there are sexually addicted women. We as a ministry don't participate. We don't have groups for that. Our for women only groups, they're called betrayed heart groups. They're for women who have been hurt significantly because of their husband's use, and they want to get healthy for themselves so that hopefully they can enter back in and have a healthy marriage if they're married, and if they're not divorced already.
Oh, okay.
That help?
And yeah. And is there so there's really no like fine line between a healthy heterosexual individual versus a porn addict? I mean, well, there is, but it's hard to tell where the two separate sometimes. If if a guy goes to like a strip club and puts like dollar bills in the stripper's lingerie, like $20 and stuff like that, and then goes home and doesn't go there until the next bachelor party or something like that, versus a guy who would do that like every night or a couple times a week, that he might have a problem with porn
Again,
addiction.
I can't speak to the sex clubs or the strip clubs, as you call them. I can say that with pornography, if a man's willing, say if he looks at porn at work, he's willing to risk his job. If he gets caught, it's pretty much zero tolerance today. Caught using porn at work, you lose your job. If he's willing to risk divorce in his family in order to look at pornography, that's significant. He's willing to risk relationship with friends, his standing in the community when it becomes public. If he's willing to risk all those things just to look at porn and engage in solo sex, wouldn't you say there's a pretty good chance he's an addict, not just a casual user? You know what I mean? So this idea that there's a casual user, yes, there is, but the numbers tell us that, again, 60 to 70% of the men use on a monthly, if not more, basis. And every time they're using, they're risking. And they're risking at this high level. I would never risk cocaine once a month. I wouldn't take a chance of that addiction coming into my life. I would take a chance of losing my marriage, my family, my relationship with my children in order to do that. But if I were willing to risk all those things just to use pornography, and I say just to, not meaning it's anything small, I would say the addiction's there. So there's a possibility that of that 60%, how many of them can't stop? Because they could stop, they would.
Good point.
That makes sense?
Yes.
That's if, by the way, that's if they see it as wrong. Now the numbers,
Good point.
I took a look somewhere, I grabbed the numbers of, I don't know where they are, of how many men say that it's wrong. And there's a difference between the church, there's a big difference between the church and the culture. And the culture, say out of 72% of the men 13 to 24 years old, I remember that number, only 13 or 18% said they would really like to stop. Where in the church, of, say, approximately 42 to 50% of men that age, because that's the number of men in the church we're using. It's well past 50% in total, but of that specific group, I want to think 1 out of 3, at least 33% or more want to quit. And if you want to quit and you can't, again, that definition of addiction starts to sneak in.
I hear you.
If I want to stop, I'm a Christian man, I want to live according to his laws and his rules, and I don't stop, but I'll risk all those things, would it be safe to say I'm struggling with an addiction, not just a problem? Difficult to be a casual user and a Christian man.
Okay. I've been just told by my producers that we've got about, less than 13 minutes left, so I want to bounce a couple off-the-wall questions for you. Prison sentence for individuals convicted of sexual assault crimes, whether it's rape, incest, or something like that. Do the prisons, do you feel, do a good job rehabilitating these people? Or do you think there's really no rehabilitation to some of these individuals?
That was 2 questions at once.
Oh, okay.
So to your first question, do the prisons do a good job? I can't answer. I don't know. I really don't know. Are they doing a good job or not? To the second question, can people be rehabilitated? I believe absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I do both as a secular man living in this world. We talked about the fact that the addiction is a problem that's neck up. The addiction's in your brain. Your brain has a disease. Your brain has a problem. It can experience healing. So men can be rehabilitated. So on one hand, yes, men can be, whether or not the prison system is doing a good job, I just can't answer.
Okay, so you have no guys who are formerly prisoners and stuff like that trying to make their way into society?
Oh, sure we do.
Oh, you do?
It's not a large amount of our groups. It's a very small percentage. But we have men that have come out of prison and then into a group and are looking to get help.
Okay. Secondly, comedian Bill Cosby and recently terminated Fox News CEO Roger Ailes. Are they porn addicts or sick, powerful men who obviously exploited their fame and status?
Frank?
You can't.
Bill
Cosby, I think a guy who would put, whether it's a famous comedian or, a schmuck that works at assembly line somewhere, if they put roofies or Quaaludes in a woman's drink at a bar or something like that, and then takes her home and takes her to his apartment or hotel or whatever and has her way with her, that's a rapist. I mean, I think he goes beyond sex, a porn addict or, a sick puppy. He's a rapist at that point. Mm-hmm. And as far as Roger Ailes, Roger Ailes might be a powerful thing. He's like 70-something years old, the former CEO of Fox News and stuff like that. And he had like these gorgeous women on the on-air personalities there that he had, doing funny things in the back room and his office personally and stuff like that. When they wouldn't, accommodate him, he'd basically get them fired or saying, we can't use you, you got bad ratings, see you later type thing. So maybe that's like more like a powerful type thing as...
I know as much about those situations as you do, what I've seen in the news, and it's more a comment. What you saw, what you see, that's how you've seen the situation. I wouldn't comment. I don't know the people. I don't know their situation.
Okay.
It'd be unfair for me to comment.
All right.
That makes sense?
I hear you. I hear you. Okay, now we talked about like scantily clad females that could be just as enticing to a porn addict as like a Penthouse or Playboy type thing, or a lot of the stuff on the internet. So would you consider like magazines like Maxim and stuff, and like Victoria's Secret catalogs, Frederick Hollywood catalogs, and the waitresses that work at Hooters restaurant, is that a what they call a soft porn type
Well,
of
I mean,
atmosphere?
let me ask you a question.
Okay,
You and I maybe are similar age group.
okay.
I know when I was 12 or 13, I was in junior high school. If I had brought Victoria's Secret magazine to school, okay, and been caught with it, what would happen? I'd have got a vacation.
Yeah,
Right.
suspension, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd be suspended, and they wouldn't call my mom in and say he was looking at a magazine. They'd call my mom or my dad to come and pick me up from school and take me home and give me a week's vacation because I brought what to school? I brought pornography. I don't see why we would say that was pornography then and why it's not today. Our brains process those images the same way then as they do today. Those images teach, or not teach, but those images create the same brain chemistry then as they do now. So was it porn then and it's not today? Is it softcore versus hardcore? Yeah, if you want to identify two different kinds of porn. But even hardcore pornography, when I was 12 or 13, hardcore pornography might have been, I don't know, magazines that truly had people being sexual together. Today, what our kids are seeing when they open their cell phone, just press one button and be into hardcore porn, which I mentioned before. Unbelievable violence, unbelievable degradation, humiliation of women. So what they see today and call hardcore pornography, as a 12 or 13-year-old young man, I couldn't even imagine. So that's what's going on today. I think that the struggle that we have, the thing that we have to consider is what's happening to our kids. What's this violence doing to our children? What are they learning about intimacy? Will they ever be able to be intimate? Will our young men be able to be intimate with a woman? Or will they expect the things they're seeing in porn? That should, again, I would say it, I said it right at the beginning, that should scare the daylights out of us.
Wow. And I didn't think we could get on this, before we talked on this interview, that we were going to talk about how I came to know the Nathan Project. I went through Soulfest, the Christian music festival in Gunstock. I guess you were there on Friday. I was there on Saturday. So we were like two ships passing in the night. Did Nathan Project, first of all, was that the first time that you had a display table at the Christian Music Festival Soulfest?
Yeah, it was. But since we're close to the end of the interview, really just quickly.
Oh, sure.
The reason for my being there was to talk about the convergence of pornography and human sex trafficking.
Oh, sure.
Okay, and that's a huge consideration today, in that the porn user is the number one candidate to become a user of prostitutes and the media, the pornography itself. And if you think of it in terms of, so he's the John, the porn user, the demand that's created is for the prostitute or the pornography, the media that's created, and the supply over on this side are human sex trafficked women and children. So this connection between the two is huge. Suffice to say, if we could reduce the use of porn, we could slow down the rate of human sex trafficking significantly. So that's what I was there for. They asked me to come and speak about the convergence of pornography and human sex trafficking. It's a show for another day, by the way, because it's a huge subject that deserves to be discussed.
Okay, in that Washington Post article that I cited at the beginning, it mentioned that, like in, I think it's Sweden or Norway, that they introduce pornography in the classrooms to teach the kids there right from wrong and consensual sex. But I think that's a fable.
I can't speak
fiction.
to what they're showing in their porn. I can only say this. We know that the porn that our young people are looking at here in America, that our 13 and 14 or 9 and 10 and 11, 12-year-olds are looking at, is hardcore, violent pornography. What they're showing in the classroom, is it the same thing our kids are seeing? I doubt it very much. I don't know. I don't know what they're doing. Did you say it was in Switzerland or Sweden?
Yeah, or Norway. One of those.
Norway. I have no idea what they're showing in their classroom, but I would guess it's nothing like the horrible pornography our children are seeing today on their cell phones, their iPads, their tablets, their computers, it's somewhere in here. Again, we can talk about it another time, but just to talk about violence and pornography is so important, to understand that we are corrupting a whole generation, totally corrupting a whole generation with the porn they look at.
Yeah. In Denmark, some teachers actually use the topic of porn to teach students about the difference between consensual and non-consensual sex, The Economist reports. So I just don't see that, because I've heard that argument too, that like sometimes if they allow like prostitution, there's less rape crimes because it's more available. But I can't see, if somebody has a problem with that, they're going to go out and...
I can't speak to that. I just continue to bring up that one fact: violence. The violence that we're seeing, the sexual that we're seeing, and one of the toughest pieces of it is that those women in those porn films are asked to make it look like they like it. So we have violence and we have women that are pretending to like what they see. So we have young men thinking that's what women like.
Incredible. Incredible. But time flies when you're having fun, I'll tell you. And I mean, it wasn't fun. It was very informative, educational. I'm very blessed that you came here to be my guest. And if you have any further questions about what Mr. Kardos does on the Nathan Project, please feel free to log on to nathanproject.net. And I guess he has phone numbers there and stuff where they can contact you if they need be. And I guess that's a wrap for another episode. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed it, and join us next time for the next episode of Frankly Speaking. Thank you.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.